The Western Cape Blood Service, also known as the WCBS, is one of two blood services that operate within South Africa. Donors and patients are its priority, whilst it facilitates the entire process of blood collection, testing, component processing, storage, distribution, and issuing of blood products.
Dear listener, welcome to the first podcast of the Western Cape Blood Service. I'm Hayley Ali, Hospital Liaison Officer, your host. A special welcome to Dr. Gregory Belize, who is Chief Executive Officer and Medical Director for WCBS, our guest.
Thanks very much, Hayley, and hello to everyone who watches this podcast.
Dr. Belize, I've heard it asked, why does blood cost money when it is given for free? There are two parts to this question. Let's start with, why does blood products cost money?
The first principle, I think, is while blood is donated freely by blood donors, in other words, they are not remunerated for their blood donation, the Western Cape Blood Service incurs many costs in testing that blood, processing that blood, and then later distributing it via the blood banks to patients in hospitals. So even though blood is donated freely by blood donors, there are many expenses that are incurred by Western Cape Blood Service that have to be recovered. Western Cape Blood Service is a non-profit organization, but despite that, our turnover is significant. Our income and expenses are in excess of 500 million rand per annum. So there's quite a lot of money flowing in and out of the service. And it's important, obviously, for sustainability that we charge for blood products and related services so that we can continue to cover our expenses going forward.
Thanks for explaining the reasons why blood products cost money, Dr. Belize. It's really interesting, the highly specialized work done by WCBS to ensure the provision of safe blood products for patients in the communities it serves. As it now stands, WCBS has been operating for the past 85 years for this cause. How has WCBS been able to remain financially sustainable over the years?
Thanks, Hayley. You're correct. This is our 85th year of existence, and we're very proud of that. In fact, there are not many companies in South Africa that are over 80 or 85 years that are pretty much doing the same thing that they were originally set out to do. So in terms of financial sustainability, Western Cape Blood Service operates on a cost recovery basis. So what this means is that each year we anticipate our expenses for the coming year, and that is based really on our tariffs for our products and services, multiplied by the volumes of the products and services that we anticipate will be needed by the province. This results in a sum of money that we need to spend to supply all those products and services to patients in hospitals throughout the province. And that also means it helps us to understand the amount of money we need to cover the expenses in doing that. So that's the principle of cost recovery budgeting. We also do build into our financial plan, our budget, the ability to fund capital expenditure. In other words, to make sure that we have all the equipment and premises that we need to collect, process, test, and distribute blood. And we do like to have a cash surplus in our accounts, which we can use for unexpected financial impacts. And these unexpected financial impacts could include events such as a worsening of the rand-dollar exchange rate or other financial shocks that impact our anticipated expenses adversely.
Thanks for explaining the cost recovery model. What are the major expenses incurred by WCBS?
The service's single biggest expense is staff, so that's salaries and other benefits. So roughly 50% of our expenses go towards staff. We have around about 530 staff spread across the province, and most of them are from professional categories, nursing staff, medical technologists, clinicians. And then in our support side of our business, we obviously have HR professionals, IT professionals, a finance department, etc. So most of our expenses go to salaries. Then roughly 10% of our expenses go towards collection. So that's the money that needs to be spent in our public relations activities, as well as the rental for blood donation clinics, whether these are permanent sites or mobile sites, etc. Then 15% of our expenses are allocated towards testing. So that's a fairly significant amount. The reason for that is that we do nucleic acid testing, and that's to ensure that the blood supply in the province is as safe as it can possibly be. Nucleic acid testing, while expensive, does give us the opportunity to shorten the window period as far as possible for the viruses for which we test, which are HIV, hepatitis B, and hepatitis C. And then of the remaining significant costs, product costs make up 10% of all expenses. And these includes things such as reagents, the blood collection bags in which we collect blood, and other expenses related to the final product. Included in that is obviously refrigeration equipment and also moving product around. And then the remaining 10 to 15% of all expenses are in a category that we call administration. So these are the expenses incurred in telecommunications, IT, transport, logistics, etc. So in short, our most significant expense is that of staff salaries, and that makes up roughly half of the services expenditure. And this is fairly similar across blood services worldwide, and in fact also aligns with industries in the for-profit space that are staff and workflow intensive and dependent. Thank you.
Thanks for the breakdown of expenses, Dr. Belize. So at the end of the day, the expenses dictate the overall income required to cover the costs. Who are the consumers? Who pays for the blood?
So the blood supplied by Western Cape Blood Service is distributed throughout all healthcare institutions in the province, and it follows that we service the state sector as well as the private sector. So starting with the state sector, when patients are admitted into state hospitals and later receive blood transfusions, we end up billing Western Cape Government Department of Health for the blood products that they use. If a patient is admitted into the private sector, the majority of them are funded by medical aids. Blood products and related services are prescribed minimum benefits, so the costs are refunded to the blood service in full. There are a few patients in the private sector who are self-funding, so they choose to be treated in the private sector and are not covered by medical aid. And that group of patients will receive an individual account from the blood service after their transfusion. And in general, we are able to recover that money.
Thanks. In conjunction with consumers and payers, who are our other stakeholders?
Yeah, so we probably have a list of maybe 15 to 20 stakeholders, but I think the most important ones we can track or identify or talk about following the vein-to-vein chain. So obviously, first of all, a very important stakeholder for us is the blood donor community. And currently in the province, there are approximately 73,000 active blood donors. An active blood donor is defined as a blood donor who's donated at least 1 unit of blood in the preceding 12 months. So they obviously are a critical stakeholder for us. Without them, there would be no blood supply for the province. And then internally, obviously, another significant stakeholder would be all of our staff. So we're required to have suitably qualified staff for all the different activities, and many of our staff have to be HPCSA accredited. Then Other important stakeholders would be the users of blood, and the users of blood are, at the end of the day, patients in hospitals, but the interface between us and the patients in hospitals is the clinicians and hospital staff. So that includes medical doctors, nurses, porters as well as transport logistics between the blood service and the hospitals. And I think a very important interface for us, and that's why we attempt wherever possible to ensure that hospital staff are both empowered as well as informed about important matters relating to blood product selection, as well as the clinical practice of transfusion, to keep that as safe as possible for the patients. And then another important stakeholder group would be the funders, the people who are ultimately paying for the blood products. So that's Western Cape Government Department of Health, as well as all of the medical aids. And then finally, a significant stakeholder group for us is our suppliers. So we're dependent on many suppliers for our core activities. So that would be for the equipment as well as reagents, for all parts of collection, processing, testing, and distribution of blood products. And then we obviously have other suppliers who are key partners in the support services for the blood service. For instance, IT contractors and companies that assist us with IT developments. We also use consultants at times for HR. We're audited financially by EY, so they're an important stakeholder. So we have many stakeholders, but I would say the most important ones for this group at whom the podcast is targeted would be clinicians and staff in hospitals who ultimately make decisions on what blood products their patient needs and then actually do the clinical practice of transfusion.
Thanks to all our stakeholders for their continued support of WCBS. Now to the next question. Does WCBS cross-subsidise the price of blood products?
Yeah, we do. I don't think it can be regarded as formal cross-subsidization, but for quite long ago historical reasons, we have two price lists. We have one for the state sector and one for the private sector. In general, the prices for the private sector are a little higher than for the state sector. And the reason for this is we have no bad debt from the state sector. So all of the accounts that we submit to Western Cape Government get paid in full and get paid timelessly. For the medical aid covered patients in the private sector, we do not have significant bad debt. But for the patients who are treated in the private sector who take responsibility for paying their accounts themselves, we do occasionally have accounts that are not settled. So that partly explains why prices in the private sector are a little higher, but it's also for legacy reasons appropriate that to an extent the usage of blood products in the private sector helps us to keep the prices in the state sector a little lower.
Thank you. And now to the second part of the opening question. Is it true or is it a misnomer that blood is given for free? And please explain why.
Good question. So the World Health Organization prefers and in fact advocates quite strongly that blood services collect blood from what are called voluntary non-remunerated blood donors. So that means that blood donors are not rewarded significantly for donating their blood. We do occasionally have campaigns where blood donors receive small gifts as token appreciation for their blood donation, but blood donors do not receive financial incentives to donate blood. So blood is truly donated for free. However, as I mentioned earlier, all of the expenses that Western Cape Blood Service has to bear is recovered from the bills or accounts that we send out for blood products. So if people need a blood transfusion and it is not paid for by the state sector or by their medical aid, we still need to recover the money for the blood product or related service from the person who receives the transfusion. So we do not give blood free to anyone, but we do occasionally recognize that there are sometimes patients in the private sector who get an account themselves, and if they have significant financial difficulty, they can motivate to us for a discount on the bill that they've been sent. When we do that, what we do is we look at their number of donations they've made and the quantum of their outstanding account. And then we've got an algorithm or formula that we follow that we can define a reasonable discount. But yeah, it's certainly not true that if a person has ever donated blood, that they will forever receive blood products free of charge thereafter, or that their family members will receive blood products for free thereafter. Were we to do that, obviously, it would result in an unsustainable financial model, and ultimately there would be no blood service at some point going forward.
Thanks. So as a rule of thumb, neither blood donors nor their family get blood for free.
In general, the answer is no. I am aware that I think many decades ago, it used to be a motivation offered to mobilize blood donors. But in the time I've been here, and in fact probably the preceding 10 to 20 years, it's not been a principle of this blood service or in fact any others that I know. But as I mentioned earlier, there are occasional unique individual cases where if a person is liable for an account for blood products themselves and they have great difficulty paying that account in full, we can arrive at a discounted amount.
Thanks. We are ending now. Do you have a closing message for our listeners, Dr. Belize?
Yeah, I do. Thanks, Hayley. I think important to recognize that, first of all, Western Cape Blood Service takes very seriously its responsibility of supplying sufficient safe blood for all patients in hospitals in the Western Cape. With that responsibility, obviously, there are significant expenses to keep making that happen, and I've detailed that earlier. But I do think it's important to note that the blood supply in South Africa is as safe as that of many more highly developed countries, so we're very proud of that. In fact, there are not that many countries that do individual donation nucleic acid testing. Many other countries do what's called mini-pool nucleic acid testing to keep costs down. In our environment, with the prevalence of HIV, we believe it's important to keep doing individual donation nucleic acid testing to enhance the maximum sensitivity of detecting that virus. And then finally, my remaining message is really that the prices for blood products we do know are significant. We do, I think, agree that they are not excessive. And that's partly because of our status as a non-profit organization. There's no incentive anywhere for blood products to be priced higher because there are no shareholder interests or financial expectations that flow to other people from the production and sale of blood products. But recognizing that blood products are costly, we do always advise that clinicians use blood products sparingly. So the best transfusion is one that is definitely clinically indicated and that the product is matched to the indication, and that if your patient only needs a single unit transfusion, that is all that should be ordered for your patient. And finally, if your patient doesn't have an absolute or clearly defined need for a blood product, one should not order blood products, but rather wait and see. And if later there is a more clearly defined indication for a blood product, then at that stage you order. Obviously, I'm slightly conflicted in the response. So obviously it's good for our business from a financial and sustainability perspective that the more blood products we sell, the more income we have to cover our expenses. But wearing my medical director hat, I prefer that we follow good clinical indications for the use of blood products. And also, I just need to reinforce that this business has been sustainable for the last 85 years. And even if demand for blood products per person in the province stabilizes or even reduces, the business is certainly able to pivot and respond to that. So that I think aligns with what I said earlier about cost recovery budgeting. When we know what we plan to sell, whether that number is going up, down, or remaining stable, we can adjust our expenses to ensure that we match expenses with income. So I think that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dr. Belize, for helping us understand the costs involved in the continued provision of a safe and sustainable blood supply for patients in the community served, as well as your closing message to use blood appropriately. We'll call it a wrap.
Thank you for listening in and watching the podcast. Until next time, do something remarkable. Donate blood.